Hey guys, and welcome back to ScarletSprites. Today is really just more of an opinion topic. There's this never-ending debate that I'm sure you've seen several times a week: emulation or original hardware. Everyone has their own point of view on this, myself included, and I think the only time you are probably dead wrong is if your opinion on that matter refuses to acknowledge the benefits of each. But today, I'm interested in a sub-argument that I've seen surfacing more recently with some of the FPGA machines. What do you mean by original hardware? Now, this is largely brought on by the release of the Analogue consoles and more recently the Mega SD. And it sounds easy, and it can be. This is my original Super Nintendo, slight discoloration and all. I have the original power plug and a Nintendo S video cable that I use with this. This is the very definition of original hardware, and I don't think too many people would argue with that. This is my original Sega Genesis. Well, not exactly original because this is the Model 2 Genesis. Come to think of it, there are even variations across the models of Genesis. There's a great breakdown of this on Sega 16 that I'll link below, but yes, there are hardware revisions of the Genesis that use different video encoders and sound chips. So when you say original hardware, in this case, are you talking about the first Genesis systems that hit the shelves before the revisions? More directly, I mean the Model 1. Or are you basically saying any model Genesis so long as it was produced by Sega, even that red-headed stepchild, the Model 3? I tend to think the majority of players would be okay so long as the machine was produced by Sega themselves, even though the various revisions do yield some variances in video and sound rendering. Again, check out that Sega 16 article for more details on that. I know this sounds crazy to even discuss, but believe me, I watched this argument go down on a forum a few years back. There are hardcore enthusiasts out there who will identify a specific hardware revision as the definitive version of Sega's 16-bit console. Speaking of revisions, that Super Nintendo we were talking about also had one. It's often referred to as the Junior or the Mini, although the latter can be a bit confusing now since the launch of the Classic Edition, which is also referred to as, well, the Mini sometimes. Much like the Genesis we just discussed, this is a hardware revision, but it also lacked S video off the shelf. To remedy that, I went ahead and opened it up and did a quick mod that enables S video output. It's a really simple mod, but does that invalidate this from being original hardware? My personal opinion on that is no, but again, you might not feel the same way since I have clearly altered this from what was originally intended by Nintendo. The processing of video and audio is all still being done by the machine's original chips, and the minor things I've had to add to the board to make S-Video work are very simple components. So is this original hardware, or is it no longer considered that because it's a revision? Or is it no longer original hardware because I then altered a revision? See how we can kind of get into the weeds here? Again, I think most people would probably call this really petty, but as small of a crack as it might be, that door is just ever so slightly open for an argument by like 1/4 of an inch. Alright, some of you guys can probably guess what's next. Here is my N64 covered in a gorgeous smoke shell. And through that smoke shell, you'll see the Ultra HDMI mod that has been installed to give this guy 1080p output. For me, this is where things become more interesting. Unlike what we've discussed previously, the N64 doesn't natively produce 1080p video output. I mean, hell, it didn't even have an HDMI port. The N64 just isn't capable of rendering high-resolution graphics like that. It needs some help to make that happen, and that's where this mod comes in. The Ultra HDMI also adds a menu with the ability to tweak plenty of picture options, including scan lines, and even a deblur option for removing horizontal filtering. And all that's pretty awesome, but absolutely none of that came stock from Nintendo. This is damn near a complete overhaul of the N64's graphical capabilities and is a result of additional hardware and code being injected into the N64. Now, does this qualify as original hardware? This is a tougher case than our previous ones, but I'd still say that since the heart of the system is being run by the Reality Engine, I'm going to go with original hardware for this despite the amount of additional muscle added in by the Ultra HDMI. If you told me you thought this was a bit too much and my system was now some kind of Frankenstein, I wouldn't argue with you though. The last piece I wanted to touch on today was FPGA. More recently, this has become popular with Analogue having released the Super NT, the Mega SG, and soon the NG Gold, right? I mean, right, Analogue? That's happening, please? Terra Onion's Mega SD that aims to be the ultimate Genesis flash cart contains Sega CD support via FPGA, and the Mr. project has also garnered a nice community following among retro enthusiasts. I hesitate to begin describing this, but essentially, the Super NT and Mega SG are, by most accounts, a Super Nintendo or a Sega Genesis console programmed onto a chip. I've heard it said that these are the best versions of original hardware, and some even say better than original hardware. Ultimately, though, these are not produced by Nintendo or Sega, and their internal components are nowhere close to resembling the senior tech of yesteryear. I look at FPGA as a fantastic step in the right direction towards preserving retro gaming, while simultaneously giving it more options and making it easier to play in the modern era. Despite some arguments I've read though, I just can't wrap my head around this being considered original hardware. It's hardware and it mimics the original, but this isn't original hardware. It is pretty awesome though, so long as you keep in mind that the accuracy of these types of projects will only be as good as the programming. So to summarize here, I think most would agree that a console out of the box with 0 mods would qualify as original hardware. I think most everyone would agree that FPGA, in turn, is then not original hardware. But where do you draw the lines, if any, regarding modifications to original hardware? Does any of it ever stop you from enjoying the actual games? As in, I will only play them on an original NES on a CRT? I'd channel my inner Chris Rock on that one and probably say that I don't necessarily agree with that, but I understand it. Go ahead and post what your guidelines are for constituting original hardware down below. Thanks so much for taking the time to weigh in on this debate. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you all next time. Later, guys.